truth is the most convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I'll tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
It's Tuesday, July 23rd, 2024, the 1280th day of dystopia. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. A warm welcome and hello to all of you listening through a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can become a paid subscriber for as little as $50 a year or $5 a month, and in doing so, you will get the ad-free experience. You'll be able to participate in the conversation over on Substack, and you will be invited to the interactive live stream every Wednesday afternoon. And if you can't or you simply don't want to, continue listening to the podcast for free on Substack, a wide variety of podcast platforms, and of course, Rumble. All I ask is that you share it with your friends. You can find the links to the podcast, the writing, the social media, and the merch site by visiting linktree.com/I'mYourModerator. Anyone who understands the roller coaster we've been on these past few years knows we haven't reached the end yet, and there may still be hard times to come. And as we add $1 trillion to the national debt every 100 days, we could be headed for some shaky financial times. If you're like me, you're figuring out how to diversify and make sure some seeds are planted for whatever may come. And that's one of the many reasons I think Bitcoin is part of our future. But it's not only about money. Bitcoin looks to be a critical part of the next generation of technology, communications, energy, verification, and even national defense. I'd encourage everyone to do their research and do it now. And if you're convinced of the likelihood that Bitcoin is an essential part of our future, then you'll need an on-ramp. I recommend River. River empowers you to grow your portfolio without any unwanted surprises and eliminates third-party custodians, putting you in control of your assets. Open an account with no minimum purchase requirement. You can get your Bitcoin journey started with just $1. Visit partner.river.com/reasonable to create your River account today. That's partner.river.com/reasonable. Now, I know that many of you out there understand the need to diversify assets, or maybe you're looking to protect your retirement savings, but you're not quite there yet on Bitcoin, and you feel better about precious metals. I get that too. I think going in multiple directions is wise, and I do that myself. And when it comes to buying precious metals, you want to be working with a good company, and that's why I've partnered with Goldco. Goldco is a 6-time Inc. 5000 winner, 2022 Company of the Year, and they've helped people like you and me place over $2 billion in gold and silver. And I have gotten silver from Goldco. And right now they're offering my supporters up to $10,000 in bonus silver while supplies last. Don't pass this offer up. Go to reasonablegold.com now. This is your opportunity to protect you and your family from an out-of-control government before it's too late. So don't wait a second longer. Take action today. Click on the link in the podcast notes or go to reasonablegold.com now and get your free gold kit, your free IRA kit. You'll be glad you did. All right, so I'm going to try to knock out a bunch of pieces of news today and set a bunch of things in place. Tomorrow, I will be traveling down to Nashville for the Bitcoin conference. And so I think I'm going to be able to do the interactive live stream around 2 p.m. Eastern time. And my plan is to have episodes of this show up on Thursday and Friday but that's going to be a little bit touch and go. But I'm going to do my best to stay on something of a normal schedule this week. I'm not quite sure I'll get there, but that's my plan going in. Nearly every day at this point seems stranger than the last and stranger than any days that have ever come before it. And all of it is very interesting. Much of it is very entertaining. But there's so much going on that it's very, very easy to fall behind. In the last 24 hours, we have had the ostensible leader of one of the global regime's proxy states, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel, land in the United States of America. He's going to be taking meetings here with U.S. leaders. He's going to give a speech before Congress. He is requesting a meeting with Donald Trump. Joe Biden, as we'll discuss later, of course, is incapacitated or no longer with us on this mortal coil, or maybe he never was. And Kamala Harris will not be attending Netanyahu's speech, probably to let everyone know that she stands with her fellow communists and progressives under the pro-Hamas banner, just like she stood under the BLM Antifa banner 4 years ago. Netanyahu, of course, speaking before Congress, it is very likely he'll have a separate meeting with Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. And it seems like that might be the most high-level official meeting he will have on this trip, except, of course, for the meeting with the actual president, Donald Trump. I suspect that, once again, we will not be hearing about the Logan Act. At some point, the people who are realizing that Joe Biden's not actually president, and maybe hasn't been for a while and maybe ever, might also realize that Donald Trump has been taking a whole lot of meetings with world leaders. It's almost like world leaders see Donald Trump as the man they need to deal with rather than Joe Biden. I wonder if it has something to do with the fact that world leaders don't get their news from the global mainstream media. They don't watch the New York Times report that Joe Biden received 81 million real lawful American votes and then think, oh, well, I guess that must be true. I wouldn't want to go around doubting that and repeating the big lie. They just hear the media report that Joe Biden is a real and legitimate president, and then they treat him that way. Except all of the leaders of consequence who aren't just simply puppets of the global regime in their country carrying forward that global regime agenda, all of those leaders actually treat Donald Trump as though he is the president of the United States of America. And that might be because no one believes that Joe Biden actually received 81 million real lawful American votes, and therefore he's not a real or legitimate president. And Donald Trump didn't just walk away and turn the country over to these communists. We're told a war effort is taking place in Israel, and the leader of that country is seeking out a meeting with Donald Trump, while no one can even conclusively say where Joe Biden is. But as I mentioned yesterday, Netanyahu isn't even the only ostensible leader of another one of the global regime proxy states that happens to be at quote-unquote war right now. Donald Trump had a phone call last week with the comedic actor from Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. Trump posted about it on Truth Social, saying, President Zelensky of Ukraine and I had a very good phone call earlier today. He congratulated me on a very successful Republican National Convention and becoming the Republican nominee for President of the United States. He condemned the heinous assassination attempt last Saturday and remarked about the American people coming together in the spirit of unity during these times. I appreciate President Zelensky for reaching out because I, as your next president of the United States, will bring peace to the world and end the war that has cost so many lives and devastated countless innocent families. Both sides will be able to come together and negotiate a deal that ends the violence and paves a path toward prosperity. So that call took place on Friday. Here is the comedic actor in Ukraine today.
And it's important that you support it. And I heard your words. I think all of us understand that we have to finish the war as soon as possible, of course, not to lose people lives. Mm-hmm.
So that was Volodymyr Zelensky with the Secretary of State of the Vatican saying that they need to end the war as soon as possible to avoid losing more lives. And it seems like we are at the point of seeing Donald Trump as the peacemaker in full view of everyone. Joe Biden is nowhere to be found. Kamala Harris is not to be taken seriously. And in their absence, peace is being negotiated and determined in Ukraine and Israel. Trump tweeted this morning, "Does Lion Kamala Harris think Joe Biden is fit to run the USA for the next 6 months? She must answer the question." Now it appears Joe is delegating his presidential authority to unelected Washington bureaucrats. He doesn't even trust his vice president, who is running the country. And that last sentence was all in capital letters. Joe is delegating his presidential authority to unelected Washington bureaucrats. And if we think about the infiltration and then the takeover of the administrative state by the global regime, the evil twin uniparty faction in the United States, then you can argue that presidents have delegated their constitutional authority to unelected bureaucrats for decades. That is the actual state of things here. Joe Biden is a figurehead. In fact, maybe he's less than a figurehead. He is simply an avatar for this disaster. Everyone but the Trump deranged and the black-pilled sees Donald Trump not as a figurehead, but as a force contesting that entity that controls these figureheads. He is an anomaly in a long line of figureheads and avatars. Trump seems to be suggesting that no one is actually in charge as president. And that is a possible situation. Joe Biden certainly is not in charge as a real and legitimate president. He never has been, to the extent that Joe Biden even sits in a position, and I don't believe that he does. He would still only be doing the bidding of the people who put him there, and that is obviously not the American people through a process of voting. The federal government has done little more over the last few years than making policy changes on paper and providing an air of legitimacy to the printing of additional U.S. dollars by the global central bankers, and then the distribution and laundering of that money to all of the special interest groups who keep that regime in power in return for the government's ability to write laws and regulations and manipulate markets on their behalf. If Joe Biden did not win an election and was not properly certified and does not exercise the power and authority of his office, then it's awfully hard to argue that he's a real president in the first place. The Joe Biden presidency is primarily a media creation meant to explain and take responsibility for what the unelected administrative state is actually doing with those executive branch authorities it now controls. But let's keep going. The big news of yesterday was Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheatle heading on down to Capitol Hill to give real testimony in a real hearing before the very, very real and legitimate U.S. Congress. Members of the Uniparty right and the Uniparty left and various other characters got to film a television show with a woman that no one heard of prior to 2 weeks ago, and now everyone knows intimately and also hates. This is ABC News. Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheatle resigns. U.S. Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheatle, who came under scrutiny for the agency's failure to prevent the assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump, has resigned. Cheatle had faced calls to step down since the shooting at a Trump rally on July 13th, which left one attendee dead and 2 others critically injured. She announced her resignation Tuesday morning in an email to Secret Service employees, which was obtained by ABC News. The Secret Service's solemn mission is to protect our nation's leaders and financial infrastructure. On July 13th, we fell short on that mission, she wrote. The scrutiny over the last week has been intense and will continue to remain as our operational tempo increases. As your director, I take full responsibility for the security lapse. In a statement following her resignation, President Joe Biden said he was, quote unquote, grateful to Cheatle for her service and that the independent review into the shooting would continue. As a leader, it takes honor, courage, and incredible integrity to take full responsibility for an organization tasked with one of the most challenging jobs in public service, Biden said. And by said, they mean wrote in a statement. And by wrote in a statement, I mean someone wrote a statement on Joe Biden's behalf and then published it. There is absolutely no reason to believe that Joe Biden had knowledge of any of that. But we are all meant to believe that that demented old pervert is still alive and kicking and fully in control of his fake presidency. He's just not capable of controlling his campaign or a future fake presidency. The fake administration's Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas thanked Cheatle for her, quote, lifelong devotion to our country, end quote, and for leading, quote, the Secret Service with skill, honor, integrity, and tireless dedication, end quote. She is deeply respected by the men and women of the agency and by her fellow leaders in the Department of Homeland Security. Mayorkas said in a statement, I am proud to have worked with Director Cheatle, and we are all grateful for her service. Secret Service Deputy Director Ronald Rowe has been named as acting director. Rowe is a 24-year veteran of the U.S. Secret Service. In an interview with ABC News after the attack, Cheatle called the incident, quote-unquote, unacceptable, and said it was her responsibility to ensure nothing like it would happen again. The buck stops with me, she said. I am the director of the Secret Service, and I need to make sure that we are performing a review and that we are giving resources to our personnel as necessary. Cheatle said in the interview that she would not resign from her role, a claim she repeated during House testimony on Monday. During the contentious hearing, Cheatle called the assassination attempt on Trump the, quote, most significant operational failure at the Secret Service in decades, end quote. The Secret Service's solemn mission is to protect our nation's leaders. On July 13th, we failed, she said in her testimony yesterday. As the director of the U.S. Secret Service, I take full responsibility for any security lapse. We are fully cooperating with ongoing investigations. We must learn what happened. And we'll skip down toward the end. The United States Secret Service has a no-fail mission. Yet it failed on Saturday when a madman attempted to assassinate President Trump, killed an innocent victim, and harmed others, House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer said. We are grateful to the brave Secret Service agents who acted quickly to protect President Trump after shots were fired and the American patriots who sought to help victims. But questions remain about how a rooftop within proximity to President Trump was left unsecure. Cheatle, who was appointed by Biden in 2022, was one of only 2 women to ever serve as director of the Secret Service. Previously, she had been the first woman to serve as the agency's assistant director of protective operations. Before her appointment, she was the senior director in global security at PepsiCo. Before that, she had served with the Secret Service for more than 25 years, including on Biden's security detail while he was vice president. And I don't want to go off too far on a tangent, but someone posted a very interesting link in the chat on Telegram last week about PepsiCo. And it's good to keep this sort of thing in mind when you're thinking about these transnational corporations. This is from 1990 in the New York Times. International report, Pepsi will be bartered for ships and vodka in deal with Soviets. So it's been widely reported in major news sources. And I say that because the story's a little crazy. Here's a quick summary from the website IFL Science, which means I effin' love science. The headline from 2022, did Pepsi own a fleet of Soviet warships during the 1980s? In 1989, PepsiCo incorporated the multinational food and drinks giant that makes Pepsi Cola, reportedly made an arrangement to get its hands on an ample fleet of submarines and warships through an unlikely deal with the Soviet Union. Coca-Cola must have been terrified. An article in the New York Times reported at the time that PepsiCo's deal with the Soviets included 17 submarines worth just $150,000 each, plus a cruiser, a frigate, and a destroyer. The bizarre tale of Pepsi trying to acquire a fleet of Soviet subs closely links to the deep problems faced by the dwindling USSR in the late 1980s. In a last-ditch attempt to pump life back into the stagnating economy, Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev pushed through a number of perestroika reforms, aiming to encourage enterprise and open up more free trade, allowing more interaction with Western capitalism, also known as state capitalism, also known as stakeholder capitalism, also known as global communism. The quip at the time was that PepsiCo would have the world's sixth biggest navy, and their CEO told a national security advisor of George H.W. Bush, "We're disarming the Soviet Union faster than you are." And you kind of got to wonder, what in the world was PepsiCo doing with submarines? Is there something we don't know here? And man, they must have some serious security issues if they need a woman as strong and competent as Kimberly Cheatle to run their security. She used to be in the Secret Service. She was right next to Dick Cheney on 9/11, so I'm sure she knows a whole lot about that day. And then she went and worked for PepsiCo, and then she was hired back into the Secret Service by a fake president. It's amazing. Now, naturally, all of the normicons in the uniparty right are going to focus on wokeness and DEI, because that's very safe territory for them. They can look strong and brave, like they're really taking it to the Biden administration as though it was a real, legitimate presidential administration. They don't ever question its legitimacy, of course, but boy, do they take it to them on wokeness and DEI. Well, they're all very upset that there were these incompetent women in the Secret Service's security detail for President Donald Trump last Saturday afternoon for the assassination event. People have probably seen the memes by now. That frumpy little woman who couldn't holster her gun at the scene of the rally in Butler, PA, and had another problem holstering her gun outside the hospital that they took President Trump to. You see, the real problem with last Saturday, how all that happened, too much reliance on women through these DEI programs. Is everyone able to understand yet that DEI and wokeness are bad and that we need to hire for important positions based on merit? Has that gotten through to everyone yet? And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but these people have repeated virtually nothing but that for like 10 straight years now. Constant wokeness. We don't even remember critical race theory anymore because it's been replaced with its new branding, DEI. The members of the uniparty right pretending to be congressmen involved in this hearing, they were doing all of that for the audience of Daily Wire because those people cannot stop consuming trans content 24 hours a day, and that's good because the Daily Wire people just can't stop making it. Both the TV characters at the Daily Wire and all of the illegitimate politicians they support want everyone to know that they are nearly 100% on being able to tell who has the wee-wees and who has the hoo-has. And as often happens when they are going on one of their anti-wokeness rampages, someone on the Trump side of things comes out and says, all right, guys, just maybe settle down a little bit. 24/7 is probably a little too much trans content. You got that, Daily Wire? Just chill out. Why don't you talk about all of the problems with our elections and with our currency for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, rather than talking about who has the wee-wees and who has the hoo-has? I wonder what kind of country we would live in if all of that time was spent on really complex, important issues rather than reaffirming every single day the most basic fact of nature. The wokeness and the gender ideology would not be a problem if we had legitimate elections. It's because our elections are fake and no one can be held accountable that this agenda keeps being implemented. No matter how much the members of the uniparty right pretend they are going to stop it, just like every other agenda that they have not stopped or even slowed down for at least the last 5 decades and probably much longer. Politico's coverage of the Cheatle resignation also mentioned the Pepsi thing in the midst of its discussion of women as Secret Service agents. writing, Cheatle worked in the Secret Service for nearly 3 decades before a stint in the private sector, helming security for PepsiCo. Biden named her director of the Secret Service in 2022. In her time there, she emphasized the importance of workforce diversity, including efforts to recruit more women to the agency. Some conservative commentators blamed those efforts for the agency's failure to keep Trump from getting shot. But people close to the former president, including his son, Eric Trump, and his former national security advisor, Robert O'Brien, have praised its female agents. And so I think that I am probably going to just by default side with Eric Trump and Robert O'Brien rather than Matt Walsh and his pal gay dad Dave Rubin, who can't stop discussing wokeness with standard issue villagers on the uniparty right. Donald Trump is now challenging the decision made by creepy Judge Arthur Engoron in New York over that business fraud lawsuit. Trump asks New York appeals court to throw out $454 million civil judgment. This in CNN yesterday. Lawyers for Donald Trump asked a New York appeals court Monday to throw out the $454 million judgment in his civil fraud trial, arguing that the monetary penalty was unconstitutional and that most of the case should have been barred because the conduct was too old. The former president's attorneys raised several other legal arguments they lost at the trial court level, including that no bank or counterparty lost money on loans, saying the judge made reversible mistakes in his rulings. The filings are Trump's latest attempt to throw out the $454 million judgment levied by state judge Arthur Engoron in February, who found Trump, 2 of his sons, Don Jr. and Eric, and their real estate business liable for fraud. The New York Attorney General's office will file their opposition papers next month. The appeals court could take up the case as soon as September. The award of $464 million in a case with no victims, no proven injuries, and no losses is not remotely defensible, Trump's lawyers wrote. The additional $10 million relates to other defendants in the case. The actual harm inflicted is nil, they argued. Thus, any punitive award would result in a ratio that is virtually infinite. Trump's attorneys said Engoron erred when he declined to toss most of the case after the appeals court ruled last year, before the civil trial, that certain conduct fell outside the statute of limitations. According to Trump's attorneys, Trump personally should have been dismissed as a defendant. If the statute of limitations was enforced, they argue, roughly $350 million of the judgment would be wiped out. So just right there, an obvious technical problem with the lawsuit that was brought against Trump would account for the bulk of the damages awarded. I would say this case is ridiculous, but it's only as ridiculous as all of the other cases. None of them will hold up. None of them are brought legitimately. The entire thing has been an embarrassment for everyone involved in bringing these lawsuits, and that will be confirmed eventually in the court of public opinion if it has not been already, and it probably has. In the filing on Monday, Trump's attorney, Chris Kise, wrote, "Such an outrageous miscarriage of justice is profoundly un-American, and a complete reversal is the only means available to restore public confidence in the integrity of the New York judicial system." All right, so let's spend some time with our anchor baby, Kamala Harris, a.k.a. Kamala Harris, a.k.a. Kamala Harris. Everyone is extremely confident that she will be the Democrats' candidate in this fake campaign, at least for now, until they choose someone else and figure out a way to replace Kamala. And it seems to be the case that they are holding an open contest for the replace Kamala role by suggesting all of the candidates who should be Kamala's running mate. This is from CNN today. A short list of Democrats who could be a vice presidential pick for Harris. So all of these people will be elevated to that national conversation. They're basically attempting to hold a popularity contest among people who are hated and people who no one's ever heard of. And most people have already developed a keen sense that all of this is pointless and they will eventually just use Hillary Clinton or one of the Obama men. CNN writes, with President Joe Biden's support unleashing a flood of endorsements from many prominent Democrats across the country, Kamala Harris has emerged as the favorite to take his place as the party's nominee for president. Harris immediately received the endorsements of many Democrat Party leaders and inherited the Biden campaign's war chest. More on that in a few minutes. The campaign formally amended filings with the Federal Election Commission to rename its principal committee and declare Harris a candidate for president. Now the conversation is fast moving around who will serve as Harris's running mate. With only 28 days until the Democrat National Convention begins in Chicago, where Harris presumably will be officially nominated, the scramble to find the Democrats' vice president nominee has begun. North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, and Arizona Senator Mark Kelly are among the Democrats who have been asked to submit information about their finances, family histories, and other personal details. Two people familiar with the process told CNN's Jeff Zeleny. They are a part of a group that includes about 10 names, nearly all of whom are elected officials. Here are some potential candidates to run alongside Harris. And so they named Josh Shapiro, Roy Cooper, Mark Kelly, Andy Beshear, the governor of Kentucky. He and J.D. Vance are currently going back and forth online, trading barbs with one another over social media. Beshear, who quote-unquote won a quote-unquote election, really took it to Vance, saying J.D. Vance is a phony. He's fake. I mean, he first says that Donald Trump is like Hitler, and now he's acting like he's Lincoln. Oh, burned. He later said, the problem with J.D. Vance is he has no conviction, but I guess his running mate has 34. Get it? 34 convictions. You get it? He's talking about Trump being a convicted felon for at least the next few weeks or something. The Democrat Beshear, we are told, was so beloved in the deep red state of Kentucky for his handling of the very deadly pandemic. He was reelected for that and his pro-abortion positions in deep red Kentucky in a very, very real, very legitimate election. And it's not because his father used to be governor and was credited with implementing Obamacare in Kentucky. It's got nothing to do with that. But moving on with the article, they mention J.B. Pritzker, the Illinois governor, who is one of the billionaire heirs of the Hyatt hotel empire. He is essentially a slightly more overt communist version of Chris Christie, also a lot richer and has more tranny siblings. For some reason, Pete Buttigieg is mentioned. He was briefly popular as a Democrat primary candidate in 2019 and 2020, and now he is a ridiculous, cartoonish clown and Dave Rubin's fellow gay dad who pretends to run the Department of Transportation. I don't know how much anyone could accomplish in that role within a fake administration, but if there is something Pete Buttigieg has accomplished, absolutely no one knows about it. We have Gretchen Whitmer, the communist governor of Michigan, who participated in faking her own attempted kidnapping. She was one of the most tyrannical governors throughout the period of the very deadly pandemic. And they mention old Gavin Newsom, the wholly illegitimate communist governor of California. They did not even bother mentioning Maryland's Wes Moore or Georgia's Raphael Warnock. Apparently, right now, it is just understood that they've got their diversity bases covered, with Kamala Harris being Indian, Jamaican, and Canadian. Now, I talked yesterday about how the members of the Uniparty cult were going to be more than happy to support, with the whole of their being, whoever they were told would be the Democrat candidate. And as that role is currently being filled by Kamala Harris, they all love Kamala Harris. Here is a little compilation posted by End Wokeness over on X, formerly Twitter, featuring Tim Miller from the self-identified as conservative outlet The Bulwark and various other MSNBC cast members.
I'm jumping out of my seat over here watching this. I think people have been thirsting for this.
And I'll just say this, and I'm with Tim. I'm jumping out of my seat higher than you, my brother. I'm just going to say that.
There was a twinkle in her eye. There was a kick in her step that, when you're vice president, you're not loose. You can't, there's somebody above you. There's somebody, you don't want to overshadow them. And this was quite the coming out. And I got chills when she said, Donald Trump, I know your type. I was blown away. I was like, I kind of fell in love with her. I thought she was smart, engaging. She's funny, feisty, twinkle in your eye, punch you in the gut. I mean, everything you kind of want. And I just thought it was a great, great opening act.
She looked completely comfortable tonight with the words she was speaking. They felt organic and genuine.
So those were the television reviews of Kamala Harris's performance yesterday in her big speech, where she read the statement that was written and published on her behalf the day before. She talks about her long relationship with Beau Biden, and that being the period during which she realized how good and decent a man Joe Biden was. And of course, that did not stop her from calling Joe Biden a racist on the debate stage in the 2020 primary process. But if you haven't called Joe Biden a racist, are you even doing politics? Now, again, it seems extraordinarily unlikely to me that they're actually going to keep Kamala Harris around through November 5th when we are supposed to have this fake election. But they can't just come out saying everyone knows Kamala Harris is not a serious person. Most people think of her as a laughingstock. They make fun of her constant cackling. She says unconscionably stupid things that seem to indicate she has never had any idea what she's talking about when it comes to any subject. She was provided a glide path into politics through former San Francisco Mayor Willie Brown, who she quote unquote dated while he was still married. She went from being a corrupt attorney general to a corrupt California senator and was then selected from among other communist black women in 2020 to be Joe Biden's running mate and ultimately become fake vice president. She received virtually zero support in that 2020 primary process, and now we're being told that everyone absolutely loves her, and they are going to need to burnish her image. If she is actually going to be the Democrat candidate in this fake campaign, they need to keep her public image strong. And if they want someone else to be the Democrat candidate in this fake campaign, they need to keep Kamala's image strong. Because as we've discussed on the podcast before, many people believe that the move will be to get Sonia Sotomayor to declare a health issue and step down from her position as Supreme Court Justice so that Kamala, the former quote-unquote prosecutor, can be nominated as a Supreme Court Justice, presumably by President Joe Biden. Now, it seems highly unlikely that she could actually navigate and get through a Senate confirmation process, at least if we were actually to believe that Republicans and Democrats opposed one another. Republicans would actually have to show opposition, though, going into an election cycle. So I can imagine that process would be slowed down. And then in that post-election period, who knows? There are going to be a lot of court cases being pursued. And you have to imagine that there's at least some possibility that Sotomayor's position on the Supreme Court could end up empty throughout that period if they actually attempt that maneuver. That would, of course, represent an all-new level of hilarity. Since the televised debate near the end of June, it's kind of become an internet subculture meme to root for Joe Biden staying in the race because of how funny it is to watch him attempt to compete with Donald Trump. It got to the point where Burning Bright and some others were calling Joe Biden our boy blue, a reference to the Will Ferrell movie Old School. No one wanted Biden to leave. Everyone wanted him to stay put. Joe Biden, leaving aside what he represents and who he actually is for a second, is hilarious. But I have to say, Kamala Harris is hilarious too. And now that we have reached this stage, I hope Kamala sticks around the same way Joe Biden stuck around for a while. The longer she sticks around, the happier I am, and they have to burnish her image no matter what is going to happen in the future. We are being told by the television and its representatives in the print media that it is a big deal that Kamala Harris received the endorsement of pop star Charlie XCX. I mean, we all know how powerful these celebrity endorsements are. Remember how Taylor Swift was going to be out there supporting Joe Biden? I guess she's just going to have to support someone else now. And of course, Barack Obama, he had Beyonce to support him. All Trump has is Kid Rock and Hulk Hogan. CNN published this article today. Charlie XCX called Kamala Harris brat. Here's why that's a strong endorsement for the candidate whose meme stock is bullish. And this is one of the big stories today, probably seeded by the Democrat machine, the Kamala Harris campaign, or whoever is actually running this thing. It's all ridiculous. But there has been an internet effort to meme Kamala Harris into coolness. The only problem is the people who might support Kamala Harris aren't funny. And they don't know anything. It's impossible to be funny if you don't have any access to the truth, because the things you say will ring hollow ultimately. Presenting Kamala Harris as cool and hip is never going to work, no matter how many times they try it. They make Kamala Harris look like a fool nonstop, always dancing around anytime she can find a group of black children, trying to represent that she has that coolness factor that you get with the hip hop lifestyle. She's black, you see. They remind us of that all the time. In fact, here is race warrior Joy Reid's position on Kamala Harris.
Hey, fam. Okay, I just got to say it. Given the just stratospheric entrance of Vice President Kamala Harris into the presidential campaign, and she has now secured enough delegates to become the nominee, you're going to look real crazy being on the other side of that line, particularly as a person of color, but really as anyone who claims to have any connection to the culture. You're going to look real weird and real lonely on that side. The door needs to close behind Amber, and she looked crazy over there. But shut the door behind her. You really are going to look crazy being on that side, given the cultural phenomenon of Vice President Kamala Debbie Harris. She's about to make history. She's about to become the first woman president. She brings together the African American community, the AAPI community, younger people. She is a whole meme. And I'm going to explain to y'all the fall of the coconut tree is a whole West Indian thing. She brings together all of the aspects of the culture. HBCUs, she's a Howard graduate. The Divine Nine, she's an AKA. She is a woman of color extraordinaire. She would be the first, person from HBCU, regular real world to be president of the United States, in addition to being the first woman president, in addition to being the first black woman president, in addition to being the first AAPI president. She's bringing it all. And very importantly, she will be the first woman president after the fall of Roe v. Wade. A woman who brings women back to power after having our power stripped from us by 6 far right-wingers on the Supreme Court, including one woman who turned on us. Baby, this is a cultural moment. Don't be on the wrong side of history. Don't find yourself on that lonely side, because you're going to look real crazy over there with Kid Rock.
So essentially, you are racist if you don't support Kamala Harris, including if you are black. If you are black and don't support Kamala Harris, you're racist. And you are going to look really silly over on the other side, on the wrong side of history. Don't you know that Kamala is black and she went to a black college and she was in a sorority at that black college? You might as well just hand her the keys to the White House and say, hey, go negotiate foreign trade deals. And sure, she's dumb as rocks, but Joy Reid says she's a whole meme. A whole meme? That's what you want in a president? If that's what you want in a president, why wouldn't you just elect Donald Trump again? Donald Trump is the subject of probably all of the best memes in history at this point. The main Kamala Harris meme is that gif of the woman with all the hot dogs being thrown at her face. But let's continue. So money from supposedly the Biden campaign was moved over to the Kamala campaign the other night. They basically just switched the name, claimed the money, and kept on going. This is Federal Elections Committee Chairman Sean Cooksey last night on Laura Ingraham.
$5 million war chest, but can she, or is she breaking the law? Joining us now to break it all down is the FEC chair, Sean Cooksey. Sean, what usually happens to candidates' money if they drop out, and why isn't that happening here?
Well, a lot of it depends on when they drop out. Here we have a situation in which a candidate is dropping out before they're the formal nominee. What should usually happen in that case under the law is that candidate first needs to give back all their general election money. That doesn't seem to be what's happening here. It seems like what instead the Democrats are going to do is, as you said, take the money and run, give it to the Harris campaign, not bother to get any FEC guidance, and just deal with any consequences on that after the election.
Now, wait a second. Are you saying that no one in the Biden campaign has reached out for even a cursory opinion from the FEC or any type of guidance?
No, in fact, the FEC has a process for just these kinds of situations. We have a process where you can come to the FEC, say you have a problem, you can get an expedited review in 20 days, get a thumbs up or a thumbs down. They decided not to do that. They just changed the paperwork on their committee, slapped a new name on it, called it the Harris for President Committee, and it looks like they're about to spend all of that money and deal with any enforcement matters or lawsuits later.
So if someone then sues and takes this to the FEC and saying this is not copacetic, it's not against it's against the regulations, could that pause the spending? I mean, how would this take? How long would this take?
Well, at the FEC, we don't have any injunctive relief. We don't have an ability to issue a restraining order or to stop it. And with so few days left until the election, 106? It's really unlikely we're going to be able to get through a complaint and an enforcement matter in that time. I think the only way that parties who want to challenge this, whether it's the Trump campaign or whether it's donors who feel like they've been wronged, they're going to have to go straight to court.
So they're going to have to go straight to federal district court, file for injunctive relief, or maybe even have a small class action if you can get that together fast? Is that how you do it?
I mean, I think that's a very plausible route. I think there are a lot of people who have problems with the way this has been handled, a lot of open questions about whether any of this was legal. I think a lot of them are probably working on their complaints right now.
All right, so that guy looks like he's about 31 years old, and apparently he's the chairman of the Federal Elections Commission. I'm sure he does a wonderful job. He just looks really young for a role like that. Now, he mentioned that there was essentially no enforcement mechanism the FEC could make use of if it turns out that this move by the Kamala campaign isn't totally legal. State media, NPR, covered it today, and NPR, National Public Radio, is 100% American state media. Can Harris or any other Democrat access Biden campaign money? The Biden campaign said it had $240 million cash on hand at the beginning of July. It likely burned through a good deal of that on ads, staffing, and the like since then. But now that President Biden is out, there's a question of whether any other candidate would or should have access to that money. The short answer seems to be that Vice President Harris, who is already poised to be the new Democrat nominee, has a strong claim to the funds because she was and is on the filing statements as a candidate with Biden. Other potential replacements would not, according to many campaign finance experts. Those candidates would have to rely on Biden donating the money to an outside group or super PAC, or he would have to stand one up on his own to support the potential Democrat nominee. but the candidate would not have control over that money or how it's used. Some right-leaning campaign finance lawyers think it's more complicated and don't think it's a slam dunk that Harris has access, despite the Biden campaign already changing its name to the Harris campaign. And obviously, we should understand that to mean that someone has the access and control to be able to make that switch on the filing forms and has done it. But here's the kicker. NPR writes, regardless, practically speaking, the question may be moot in the short term because of how long the Federal Election Commission takes to adjudicate complaints. Harris would almost certainly have access to the funds through the compressed campaign, and there's little to nothing the FEC can do about it because of the timeline. In fact, as some have pointed out, there are still open complaints to the FEC from the 2016 campaign. And let's pause for just a second. A state media outlet just let us know that a government agency wouldn't be able to enforce election laws if it just so happened that a candidate decided to override those election laws because we are too close to the election. So we have a state media outlet whose job is to represent, to be the voice of the government, and they are telling us that it's okay to violate election laws because the government agency has no enforcement mechanism it can employ in time for the fake election scheduled for November 5th. And if you want to fix it, you need to file lawsuits. You need to wage lawfare against the Democrat machine in hopes that a court will enforce election law because the government says they can't do it. And the government's propaganda arm tells all of the standard issue villagers out there that it's just fine. There's nothing we can do about this. So if it turns out that what they did is illegal, well, they're just going to be allowed to do it. And if people pursue it after, well, it'll be a moot point by then. People have asked and discussed this for months. Will the party's bylaws, will the election laws make it impossible to remove and replace Joe Biden? And I've consistently said that the answer is no, of course not. They don't care about these election laws. They don't care about party bylaws. They violated all of these things countless times, and they've never been held accountable for it. They steal elections. They don't care about election laws. They don't care about the party's bylaws, and they don't care about the Constitution. What they care about is power, and they will do anything to acquire power, and then they will do anything to protect that power. Anyone who thought their plans would be thwarted because of the party's bylaws or election laws is detached from reality and failing to understand what is happening right now. They aren't even hiding it anymore. They're right up in everyone's faces, and the propaganda outlet is telling people this is just fine. And if you have a problem with it, it actually doesn't matter because nothing's going to be done about it. At some point, maybe people who have supported the Uniparty throughout all this time, whether it was by going out and actively voting for Joe Biden, or whether it was by supporting him in pretending that he actually received 81 million real lawful American votes and was a legitimate president, as the members of the GOP establishment have done. All the people who wanted to support Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley are responsible for supporting Biden and Harris every bit as much as their own voters did. There is no way this period would be playing out as it has if the Republican establishment wasn't on board with the uniparty agenda, including Joe Biden's legitimacy. People who call Joe Biden president and pretend he's legitimate are every bit as much a Biden supporter as the people who actually waste their time going out to vote for him in fake elections. And the same applies to the supporters of every one of these candidates in the fake primaries and every one of the uniparty left communists who will announce their candidacy in this blitz primary we are witnessing. The article in NPR references the same Sean Cooksey, chairman of the FEC, a Republican appointed by former President Donald Trump. How about that? He's one of 3 Republicans on the commission, along with 3 Democrats. He intimated in a social media post that Harris might not actually be eligible to access the funds and kicked off a debate about the subject. He pointed to this regulation, and they highlight 11 CFR 110.1 B3 CFR being the Code of Federal Regulations. It says if the candidate is not a candidate in the general election, all contributions made for the general election shall be either returned or refunded to the contributors or redesignated or reattributed as appropriate. On NPR's Morning Edition Monday, Cooksey said, "I think it's really complicated," is the short answer, adding, "I think it's going to have to go through a process through the FEC. I expect there's going to probably be challenges to that at the agency and probably in the courts as well." Others disagreed with that and see this as pretty cut and dried. "It doesn't look that complicated to me," Ellen Weintraub, a Democrat and vice chair of the FEC, said in a phone interview. She's a longtime commissioner of the agency. She points to the fact that Harris's name was always on the statement of organization for the Biden presidential campaign committee as one of the candidates. "The bottom line is it's the same committee," Weintraub said. "She's always been part of that committee. She never had a separate contribution limit apart from this committee that her name's already on. It's not just me. Lawyers all over town seem to be saying the same thing. Someone could undoubtedly come up with a technical argument, and I would keep an open mind, but it doesn't seem all that complicated to me." If someone were to challenge it, she added, "There are questions about where such a challenge would be filed and whether the filer would even have standing. The FEC, according to NPR, has long been hobbled by partisanship and a lack of resources in being able to address these kinds of matters in timely ways. Campaign violations are often penalized years later, and monetary penalties are usually relatively nominal to the millions, if not billions, of dollars spent on campaigns." And we were discussing earlier the business fraud civil trial in New York of Donald Trump. But let's think for a second about Law and Order New York, the loudest hush money. As convoluted as that case was, it involved what was claimed to be some sort of election finance violation. Donald Trump had made these payments to Stormy Daniels in order to influence the outcome of the election, and therefore, through whatever convoluted means, this constitutes some sort of illegal campaign spending. He was using campaign money to commit this other crime, not that anyone ever decided what that other crime was. In fact, it was decided that no one had to decide what that crime was. They just needed to assume that money was paid in order to influence an election, and because Donald Trump is bad, that money must have been paid in commission of some sort of crime, all to steal that 2016 election. But here we're being told that there might be an election finance violation just right up in everyone's face, right out in the open. And despite it being obvious and widely known, it simply doesn't matter because the government agency who would pursue these claims just isn't going to be able to do it in time for this election. Part of the point of this period, if we are indeed in a period of intentional exposure and disclosure of government corruption and how the system actually works, part of the point is to discover that that system is not going to protect you, and it's not going to protect principles. It is going to function as designed to protect the pursuit of power by members of the Uniparty, as the evil twin faction in America, the representatives of the global regime. The system is designed to give them power and give them the ability to protect that power. It does not exist so that they can enforce their rules against themselves. The only time they ever do that is when they need to leverage against someone or take that person down. And so let's talk about the mostly absent fake president. In the wake of the letter written on behalf of Joe Biden and published on Joe Biden's personal account on X, formerly Twitter, also on behalf of Joe Biden and clearly not written by Joe Biden, Donald Trump responded with a series of posts on Truth Social Sunday through the afternoon and evening, and then yesterday in the morning. And he started this way. Crooked Joe Biden was not fit to run for president and is certainly not fit to serve and never was. He only attained the position of president by lies, fake news, and not leaving his basement. All those around him, including his doctor and the media, knew that he wasn't capable of being president, and he wasn't. And now, look what he's done to our country. with millions of people coming across our border, totally unchecked and unvetted. Many from prisons, mental institutions, and record numbers of terrorists. We will suffer greatly because of his presidency, but we will remedy the damage he has done very quickly, make America great again. And he concluded, Crooked Joe Biden is the worst president by far in the history of our nation. He has done everything possible to destroy our country, from our southern border to energy dominance, national security, international standing, and so much more. He was annihilated in an earth-shattering debate, and now the corrupt and radical Democrats are throwing him overboard. He was not fit to serve from the very beginning, but the people around him lied to America about his complete and total mental, physical, and cognitive demise. Whatever the left puts up now will just be more of the same, make America great again. And that is pretty provocative. Complete and total mental, physical, and cognitive demise. And demise is an interesting word choice. Its definition in its noun form is death, a cessation of existence or activity, or a loss of position or status, this according to Merriam-Webster. The conveyance of an estate, the transfer of the sovereignty to a successor. And demise is also a verb that means to convey by will or lease, or to transmit by succession or inheritance. I wonder if Joe Biden has transmitted his mental, physical, and cognitive demise to Kamala Harris. But let's continue on Trump's Truth Social. He wrote, Crooked Joe just got knocked out, so now I'll have to do it a fourth time. And I guess maybe that means defeating Democrat presidential candidates, Hillary once, Joe Biden twice, and Kamala. He continued, does anybody really believe that Crooked Joe had COVID? No, he wanted to get out ever since June 27th, the night of the debate, where he was completely obliterated. That was the big moment in Joe Biden's demise. That was the point in time when Joe was revealed for what he is, an incompetent man who should never have been president. Joe Biden is not fit to serve. He is destroying our country. My debate with Joe Biden, the worst president in the history of the United States, was slated to be broadcast on Fake News ABC, the home of George Slopadopoulos, sometime in September. Now that Joe has, not surprisingly, quit the race, I think the debate with whomever the radical left Democrats choose should be held on Fox News rather than very biased ABC. Thank you. And he signed it DJT. He went on. So we are forced to spend time and money on fighting Crooked Joe Biden. He polls badly after having a terrible debate and quits the race. Now we have to start all over again. Shouldn't the Republican Party be reimbursed for fraud in that everybody around Joe, including his doctors and the fake news media, knew he was not capable of running for or being president? Just asking. And then it got really interesting. Trump wrote, it's not over. Tomorrow, Crooked Joe Biden's going to wake up and forget that he dropped out of the race today. And he wrote that well into Sunday evening, by which time the internet had basically come to the conclusion that we cannot simply presume that the letter announcing Joe Biden would no longer be the Democrat candidate was actually produced by or signed off by Joe Biden. We talked about the letterhead yesterday. The signature has also come under scrutiny. It has a little underline as part of it. No one has ever seen an underline on a Joe Biden signature before. It was bad enough that there were multiple different Joe Biden signatures. People have noticed that right from the beginning of the fake president's fake presidency. It is becoming clear to anyone who pays attention that this is not legitimate. Trump continued Sunday evening, writing, Biden never had COVID. He is a threat to democracy. And he went on, who is running our country right now? It's not Crooked Joe. He has no idea where he is. If he can't run for office, he can't run our country. And so that brings us to Monday morning. He started the day by writing this. The Democrats pick a candidate, Crooked Joe Biden. He loses the debate badly, then panics and makes mistake after mistake, is told he can't win, and decide they will pick another candidate, probably Harris. They stole the race from Biden after he won it in the primaries. A first. These people are the real threat to democracy. And he wrote threat to democracy in capital letters. But here's what I think is the most interesting, and keep in mind, he hinted on Sunday night that Joe Biden might not really be as gone as they want him to be. He said yesterday in the morning, it's a new day and Joe Biden doesn't remember quitting the race yesterday. He is demanding his campaign schedule and arranging talks with Presidents Xi of China and Putin of Russia concerning the possible start of World War III. Biden is, quote, sharp, decisive, energetic, angry, and ready to go, end quote. And I don't know who Donald Trump is quoting there, but that is quite an interesting description of Joe Biden as a man who is totally with it. He's strong and ready, and maybe he even wants a little revenge for all of the power players in the Democrat Party going along with this story about how Joe Biden was going to drop out. And I thought, man, that is a very, very strange post. Why is Trump continuing to hint that Joe's not going to drop out? I mean, one post, sure, troll a little bit on the idea that Joe Biden wasn't involved in writing that letter or posting that letter. And of course, he wasn't involved in the decision either. Other people were doing all of that. None of it actually even required Joe Biden's knowledge. That's some good trolling, and we're known to do a little trolling.
A little trolling. It's called we do a little trolling.
But that second post sounded different. Let's read it again. It's a new day and Joe Biden doesn't remember quitting the race yesterday. He is demanding his campaign schedule and arranging talks with Presidents Xi of China and Putin of Russia concerning the possible start of World War III. Now, Joe Biden hasn't been talking to Putin at all, not for years. And there's no way Xi Jinping thinks that Joe Biden is a real president with real power who is setting U.S. policy. There would certainly be no reason for them to be talking to Joe Biden at this point unless Joe Biden was calling to announce his surrender. And the point I'm about to make will not appeal to normies at all. But if you are one of those people who has observed these last 4 years and says to yourself, well, it's obvious that Joe Biden is under control, but he's so incompetent and so bad that it almost seems like he must be under the control of Donald Trump or the people around Trump. And whether that's because all of this is scripted or that Joe is in so much trouble that he's being forced to do whatever he's told, or that the game theory just has Joe Biden so well boxed in that he can only make a certain range of choices, then these posts have a whole different tone. Especially if you think that Biden might be controlled by Trump and the people around Trump, because then this is just Donald Trump holding open negotiations in public and suggesting to the people trying to get rid of Joe Biden that Joe Biden's not going to go anywhere. Donald Trump is actually prepared to press the issue on this announcement of Biden's candidacy ending and Joe stepping down from being the Democrat candidate in the fake election. It sounds to me like Donald Trump is applying leverage and potentially even trolling to the extent that he is the one talking to Putin and Xi. Should we really think that Donald Trump is not conducting all of the foreign policy that does not include global regime figures? Joe Biden is not a real or legitimate president. The people who control Joe Biden were not elected by the American people to run this country, nor was the bureaucratic administrative state. To think anyone other than Donald Trump would be conducting foreign policy in the role of American president at this point, to me, is insane. If someone is serving in that role, it is absolutely definitely Donald Trump. Now, we've talked a bunch of times over the past few weeks about how Joe Biden is toast. He's getting heat from both sides. Joe Biden is meant to be the fall guy and the vessel for all the guilt and accountability attached to all these crimes against America and crimes against humanity that have been committed over the course of decades, the decades, 5 of which Joe Biden has been in American politics. And so from a narrative perspective, the idea is to chip away at Joe Biden's reputation very slowly. The public image that would suggest Joe Biden is a real legitimate president right now, fully competent, in charge of all of his physical and mental and cognitive faculties. must be slowly and gently removed so that people will accept a replacement. They want people who can't imagine having Trump be president again to not only be comfortable with whatever they do, but to be prepared to fully support whatever they do. So they can't just come out and say that Joe Biden is corrupt, he's a political criminal, he's a pervert, he's demented, and he was never actually elected president in the first place, so he is a usurper who commits treason in every moment he pretends to be president. They can't come out and say that. They're just going to have to chip away a little bit at a time on one side and then burnish his image from the other side. On Sunday and through part of yesterday at least, we got stories about how Joe Biden was like George Washington, an American patriot and hero who was just willing to do anything for his country, no matter how much it hurt him personally. He's just not a quitter at all, not in any facet of his life, but he was nonetheless willing to step back, to stand back and stand by for the good of the country and allow some other member of the Democrat Communist Party to serve as Democrat candidate in this fake election. Joe Biden isn't only good, he's the best of all of us, the best there might ever be, until they replace him with another candidate. And then surely that candidate will be the best, because that candidate's going to have to get even more than 81 million real lawful American votes. So they spent all that time propping him up. And then from the other side of the controlled opposition dynamic, there were stories about how Joe Biden is actually very sick. In fact, there was a medical emergency last Wednesday in Las Vegas, and they've been hiding Joe Biden away ever since, covering the whole thing up with COVID and then putting out this message about Joe Biden stepping down. There were even some hints, some posts that went viral, maybe badly sourced, maybe not. But the point is, it was out there in the public conversation that Joe Biden had entered hospice care and may not make it through the night. And until this afternoon, no one had seen Joe Biden in 6 days. There's no confirmation that he wrote that letter, was aware of that letter, wanted that letter to be published. Kamala Harris and the media just pretended like nothing ever happened, and as though she was the candidate the entire time and just plowed on ahead. And no one was even sure who was actually serving as fake president. Trump in his posts seems to be threatening the global regime, like, I'm going to keep Joe Biden in this position in the narrative, and people are going to believe me. And of course, I don't know that that's what he was doing, but I think that that would work. For whatever reason, the regime decided to reduce and diminish Joe Biden's reputation once again today, even though just yesterday they were crawling all over one another, trying to see who could grovel the hardest about how great a man Joe Biden is. This is from Politico this morning. Feds discover transcripts of Biden chats with biographer. The Justice Department told a federal judge late Monday that it has located transcripts it previously denied having of President Joe Biden's talks with a biographer that played a role in the recently completed criminal investigation into Biden's handling of classified material before he became president. In the wake of a report special counsel Robert Hur issued in February that described Biden as a, quote, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory, end quote, the Justice Department has been swamped with FOIA requests and lawsuits demanding access to various records related to Hur's probe. Some of the requests came from news outlets, while others originated with conservative groups, apparently seeking to obtain information that could reinforce doubts about Biden's mental acuity and fitness for the presidency. Nagging concerns about those issues, particularly after a disastrous debate performance against Donald Trump last month, helped drive Biden's announcement Sunday that he is dropping his bid for re-election. It's unclear whether his exit from the race will affect the handling of Hur's materials by the Justice Department, which has argued that the release of audio of Biden's interviews with Hur would violate the president's privacy, lead to potential abuse, such as deepfakes, and deter other witnesses from agreeing to recorded interviews. Biden asserted executive privilege over the audio recordings of his interviews in a bid to head off House Republicans' effort to hold Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress for refusing to release the recordings. At a hearing last month, DOJ lawyers handling one Freedom of Information case told U.S. District Judge Dabney Friedrich that it would be highly time-consuming to process other audio files containing Biden's interviews with writer Mark Zwanitzer. The attorneys said those recordings stretched to 70 hours, and reviewing audio for potential classified material is far more difficult than written material. We don't have some transcript that's been created by the special counsel that we can attest to its accuracy, Justice Department lawyer Cameron Silverberg told Friedrich at the June 18th hearing on a suit brought by the Conservative Heritage Foundation. Those are the same people, by the way, who are responsible for Project 2025, which Donald Trump continues to disavow. It is also worth noting, by the way, that I can post an episode of my podcast to Substack, and it will create automatically a transcript of my podcast, whether it's an hour long or 2 hours long or whatever. It will create a transcript within a couple of minutes. So I have absolutely no doubt that a transcript could be created of those interviews in a minimal amount of time so that any review could be done. All of that just screams nonsense to me. Back to Politico. However, Silverberg said in a court filing Monday night that the department in the past few days confirmed that Her's office had transcripts made of a portion of Biden's discussions with Zwanitzer, which occurred as Biden worked with him on memoirs published in 2007 and 2017. Prosecutors determined that some of those conversations contained classified information, although they were barred by the Justice Department policy from pursuing charges against the sitting president, and said they would not have done so in any event because of the imprecision of Biden's memory and other factors. In the past few days, the department located 6 electronic files consisting of a total of 117 pages that appeared to be verbatim transcripts of a small subset of the Biden-Zwanitzer audio recordings created for the special counsel by a court reporting service, Silverberg wrote in the new filing. Now, I personally don't care about these transcripts. I don't care what Joe Biden said to Robert Hur. I don't need to hear Joe Biden fumble his words on another recording to know that Joe Biden's mental acuity isn't there. I also don't need to hear it as evidence that Joe Biden is a political criminal. That's been his life in politics for 50 years. It is beyond proven. It has been proven countless times. And it's even been widely reported. And there is also, of course, the Hunter Biden laptop and the report on the Biden laptop by Marco Polo. So these recordings and the transcripts of these recordings mean very little to me. I also think that they mean very little in a narrative sense generally, and that becomes even more true if Joe Biden is already on an exit ramp off the political stage, not that he could find that. So acknowledgement of the existence of these transcripts comes after it really doesn't matter anymore, except if there's still a need to tear down Joe Biden. Well, who would have that need? Certainly not any of us. Donald Trump doesn't need to tear down Joe Biden. There's not even a campaign anymore. Not that there was one to begin with. And what would be the point of further diminishing Biden if he's already stepped down and that's a done deal? Now, again, I can't tell you this is how it is. I don't know this is how it is. We are in an awfully strange situation, but I think this framing maps onto reality with the information we are receiving. A few hours after this article was published on Politico's website, Joe Biden finally came out of hiding, writing from the official @POTUS account on X, formerly Twitter. Tomorrow evening at 8 p.m. Eastern, I will address the nation from the Oval Office on what lies ahead and how I will finish the job for the American people. So Joe Biden is going to use the Oval Office for the second time in about 10 days. You'll remember the last time was after the assassination event when Joe Biden wanted to ask everybody to turn down the heat on the political rhetoric. Now, he has not done that himself at all. But again, Joe Biden's not really in control of Joe Biden. It'll be interesting to see what Joe Biden says tomorrow evening. Odds are he will probably just repeat the company line and say that he is stepping down and he's putting his support behind Kamala Harris, at least for now. And he will probably attempt to present himself as strong and faithful and patriotic and willing to sacrifice for his country and his party. Oh, what an important moment in American history we will be told that is, despite it not really being important at all. It is merely a charade. Joe Biden is merely an avatar for what this moment is. Joe Biden also had a photo opportunity staged for him this morning, getting on to the old Air Force One. A very spry, strong, energetic Joe Biden descending the staircase into the plane without any problems at all. Apparently, the COVID of last week has left the fake president no worse for wear. With Joe Biden so active and in such good shape upon recovering from yet another bout with the very deadly pandemic, despite being multiple times vaccinated, one might wonder if Joe Biden really is scheduling calls with Putin and Xi. And of course, as I said, there's no way that's happening, but hopefully someone is on that, because we're being told that things are ramping up with China and Taiwan, the coming parallel to Russia-Ukraine. We've been getting previews of this conflict for years now, have discussed it numerous times, and it seems like it might soon be upon us. Maybe it will happen while no one knows who the president is. This Democrat Party in disarray, this old and ineffectual fake president at the switch. He failed to prevent the Russia-Ukraine crisis. In fact, he was a part of creating it. He's failed to prevent this Israel-Hamas conflict that began with Israel's 9/11, the paragliding go-kart incident, when terrorists on paragliding go-karts flew over the strongest, safest, and most secure border in the history of the world, nearly causing World War III. You could blame Joe Biden's foreign policy for that if you like to. Not that he's actually directing foreign policy, but in a narrative sense. And now it seems Joe Biden will take responsibility for whatever might happen in China and Taiwan. And this might just be a narrative buildup to create additional pressure going into this fake election season. But even at the narrative level, think about the effect. Our two greatest adversaries, these two other world superpowers, able to do absolutely whatever they want because the fake president is incapacitated. No one knows where he is, and no one is even pretending anymore that he's in charge. None other than Mike Pence published an op-ed about this morning in Fox News. I'm not going to go all the way through it. The headline, here's what U.S. must do now to deter China military threat. He writes, the Chinese Communist Party is a geopolitical cancer that will metastasize unless America can contain it with a once-in-a-generation investment in our national defense. Already, the CCP is actively colluding with Russia, prolonging Putin's war against Ukraine by blunting the impact of Western sanctions. It reaffirmed its support for Iran, even after the deadly October 7th attacks against Israel, and that is the paragliding go-kart incident. And China has an explicit defense treaty with Kim Jong-un's North Korean dictatorship. To make matters even more dire, Chinese President Xi Jinping has instructed his People's Liberation Army to be ready to invade Taiwan by 2027. As George Washington counseled Congress in the nation's first ever inaugural address, quote, to be prepared for war is the most effectual means of preserving the peace. Tragically, we are less prepared than ever to meet today's crises. And Pence goes on to discuss the threat posed by China as outlined in a report from Senator Roger Wicker. And a lot of it just sounds like he is pining away for some handouts for the military-industrial complex, but it's actually more interesting than that. And people who are open to the idea of there being kind of more going on with Mike Pence behind the scenes than we are led to believe are more inclined to reckon with what he's actually saying here. Now, Donald Trump has made it very clear that there's not going to be a World War III. He's said that the China-Taiwan conflict is not going to happen, certainly not with him as president. And so rather than considering this in the context of a ramping up into a war scenario, let's just look at what he's actually saying. And now this is down toward the end. This is what I think is interesting here. Wicker warns that Chinese nuclear capacity will exceed our own sometime in the 2030s, while Russia's is already, quote, larger, more modern, and more diverse, end quote, than ours. We are the only nuclear country that is incapable of producing any more. How about that? It sounds like that whole problem we have with being able to get back to the moon. We got to the moon, you see, like half a century ago, but then they lost the plans. They lost the technology. We can't do it anymore. We're not able to fly up into outer space and land a dune buggy on the moon, transported down there by some little pod built out of aluminum foil and shower rods. Somehow it became impossible to do that. Darn technology, once you lose it, you just can't figure out how it ever worked in the first place. But let's continue here. Revitalizing our capacity must become a priority, and we should consider recreating something like the NATO Nuclear Burden Sharing Agreement with closely allied countries in the Pacific like Australia, Japan, and South Korea. The breakout pace in space is also profound. Top officials have warned. The U.S. Chief of Space Operations, General B. Chance Saltzman, has warned that the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, has more than 470 spy satellites undergirding a, quote, robust sensor shooter kill web, an unacceptable risk to our forward deployed force. And now this is starting to sound like drone warfare and soft war. Nuclear energy, the choice of much Bitcoin mining, and warfare in the sky and in cyberspace. As Wicker urges, our Space Force must evolve in its offensive capacities, developing the infrastructure necessary to, quote, break the kill web of U.S. adversaries, end quote. Recent operations in the Red Sea, Pence writes, have highlighted the need for such focused development and innovation in our counter-drone operations. We simply cannot afford to resupply and maintain the arsenal of democracy if we continue to use $2 million missiles to take down $2,000 drones. And nothing should be more obvious than that. He concludes this way. I have sometimes been belittled as an eternal optimist for my unshakable belief that America can rise to meet the challenges before her if only we have a government as good as our people. I don't think that's optimism so much as an accurate sense of history. But even still, victory is anything but assured in this existential competition. Anyone who thinks we are prepared for what is to come needs to sober up and check their clocks. It may still be morning in America, but the light is fading fast in Beijing. The American Enterprise Institute apparently does a weekly China-Taiwan update, and in their update this week, they note that the People's Liberation Army has intensified its incursions into Taiwan's air defense identification zone, with at least 325 violations reported in June alone. And again, it's important to remember that Taiwan is just part of China. It is U.S. policy that there is a one China policy. People can talk about Taiwan being an independent nation and an independent people, and we might get there at some point. But as of right now, it is a global regime proxy state just off China's sovereign territory, the same way that Ukraine was a global regime proxy state just off of Russia's territory, and the same way that Israel is a global regime proxy state right in the heart of the Arab nations of the Middle East. It's not some accident that these regime proxy states, nations that only exist because globalist and Zionist powers drew their borders on a map, are in conflict during this period. And if we are going to see an escalation between China and Taiwan, you would have to think that we are quickly approaching the time where that might happen. All right, so as I said, the interactive live stream will be tomorrow afternoon. I'm going to have to get on the ground in Nashville and get settled and set up. And then I hope to be able to start the stream. I will definitely post on Telegram Truth Social, and on Substack. If for some reason I am unable to do it, I don't know what is going to happen, obviously, with the airlines. But assuming everything goes as planned, I should be able to start that at some point around 2 p.m. Eastern. The rest of the episodes this week are up in the air, but I hope to be back on this show on Thursday at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic, and Joe Biden will never be president.
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening to this episode for free, you can support me and support the show and the work I do by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can do so for as low as $50 a year or $5 a month. Comes out to under $0.25 per episode, and you'll blast right through the paywall for all of the writing. The merch store is www.cancelcouture.com, and you can find everything else by heading to Linktree. Linktree.com/I'm your moderator. And I'll see you soon out on the range. It's hell!